Kyle here from allmediareviews.blogspot.com. Take 16 or something like that. Artist review, King Crimson. Alright. They formed in the late 1960s. I believe a couple of things I've seen online said 1968. Their first album, let me just go back here and mention this. Robert Fripp, Mike Giles, and Ian McDonald, I think. At least Giles and Fripp and one other member did an album that you see sometimes. I frequently see at Half Price Books. Maybe it was someone else named Giles, when Mike Giles was the drummer. Anyway, that was pre-King Crimson, but it came out sort of way after they became... Well, it may have been released independently, but it got more distribution, of course, after they got more popular. But in 1969, they released In the Court of the Crimson King, which I have 2 copies of. This came out the same day in October of 1969 as Frank Zappa's Hot Rats, which might be one of, if not Frank Zappa's most sort of progressive rock-like albums, although I believe it's all instrumental. But yeah, this pressing right here is a Japanese pressing I have, which has lyrics in Japanese and which is kind of cool, and some other pieces in the insert. And yeah, it took me a long time to find a copy of this for various reasons. I think part of it was it just wasn't easy to find. You don't see King Crimson's vinyls that often used. People that own their vinyls keep them. But also when I would see or I saw reissues, repress, and they're always really expensive. So this became, especially in the last decade, an uber popular album among hipsters for some reason. The rest of their music I'm not so sure about, but I don't know if it's partly to do with the sort of artwork, iconic artwork, some modern artists mentioning this album. See, this is an Atlantic pressing. I'm not sure how. It came out in '71, this version. I remember just looking at it a minute ago. In Japan, of course, so it was a couple years after the original release. But it has Robert Fripp, of course, on guitar, Greg Lake on bass and lead vocals, Ian McDonald on flute, saxophone, and then he did some mellotron and anything other, like, I think, see here, all woodwinds and vibes too, and he does some vocals as well. And then Mike Giles on drums, percussion, and some vocals, and then Peter Sinfield wrote the words and illumination being, I think he did the artwork. And let's see here, I just was reading, Pete Sinfield was a member for a couple more years after this came out, and he did play some keyboards at one point. So I have this other copy right here, which is just a standard, and I don't even know if this is a first pressing, but I only paid a couple bucks for it. The Japanese one I paid more for. So just going over this record, it is highly regarded, but it's sort of a rare case, I think, of an album that deserves all the praise that it gets. It's sort of like Sgt. Pepper's or I don't know, just some other examples. The Dark Side of the Moon to a point, maybe. Close to the Edge. I don't know. I mean, those are more iconic to other people than me, but for some reason this record, while I don't know if I'd say this is my favorite King Crimson album, I also can't say I prefer anything over it. It's my feeling on King Crimson, my sort of fandom, is not at the levels of some people. Part of it's because they kind of morphed into different styles, and their music is sort of, and it changed so much that it just, but at the same time, it's weird with them when I really get, like, especially the 70s stuff, this album, the 70s stuff, when their music is good, it's just awesome. But this album had a lot of jazz influences, and I wonder if Robert Fripp and some of the other guys might have been listening to, like, Miles Davis, because that was around the time, like, Bitches Brew came out. I think that was 69. It was 69 or 70, but anyway, in the 21st Century Schizoid Man features distorted vocals, of course, which was kind of new, and it didn't really sound like standard blues-based rock music at all. Even like the Beatles psychedelic stuff, it was different from that. That's why it sounded almost like a jazz album. A lot of music sounded very jazzy. The percussion especially, I mean, Mike Giles' drum work on this is very jazz-like. I think he even uses some brushes and some other things. But that song was iconic, and it just has a great crescendo with the saxophone part and everything. In fact, I have a DVD. One of the first DVDs I ever bought. Our own DVDs were starting to become not the norm, but they were becoming the norm in the mid-90s. They had a DVD called DejaVROOM, and you could listen to 21st Century Schizoid Man with, I want to say 3, maybe 4 different lineups. And the cool thing about it is they isolated the guitar, the bass, the vocals, and you could do is mix and match them. So if you wanted to have John Wetton sing with the bass part of Greg Lake, or at least with Ian McDonald, or you want to have Adrian Belew sing with Mike Giles as the drummer, you could do that on that one song. It was, I don't know if other DVDs have come out and done that. There probably have been some, but at the time it was like sort of innovative, it seemed like. And then they had, like, of course, multiple camera angles you could watch. They had the double trio on it anyway. That was later in their history. This album, though, also features In the Court of the Crimson King, which is great. Great use of Mellotron on that piece. And I'm still blanking on the Clive Nolan movie that featured that song, which was Children of Men. That's what I'm thinking of. Children of Men, it was shown in, and while I liked the use of it in Children of Men, it didn't. The Children of Men itself, the movie, I found to be a little underwhelming, a little kind of self-indulgent or something. I can't remember, but I did like the fact they used it. But it also features, of course, Moonchild, which is kind of a divisive track. People that don't care for it thinks it's kind of boring. And that actually I also associate with Buffalo 66, a movie from Vincent Gallo, which actually includes some Yes music, because Gallo was a prog head and a filmmaker. He was kind of at that point in the 90s. He still is, but anyway, great kind of mellow, you know. It does sound like they're on drugs to a point, but it's very dreamy. And the other really excellent track on this album is Epitaph, which I remember getting the Young Person's Guide to Discipline Volume 1 or 2 on cassette tape in the mid-90s when I first heard their name, and it had that song. I remember I was getting into Fates Warned at the same time. Fates Warned had a song called Epitaph, so I thought that was kind of interesting. And then I Talk to the Wind, which is a sort of a ballad acoustic piece, but it's kind of dreamy. So yeah, I mean, I like this record a lot. Not that I listen to it a ton now, but if I'm going to listen to a Crimson album, I might go to it because it has some of the more accessible pieces and sort of memorable music they ever did. So anyway, the next year they released in the Wake of Poseidon, and my copy, I was just looking at a minute ago, the print in the inside is a little bit dicey to try to read, although it does show it. You can see it. This came out, and like Pink Floyd's second album, Saucerful of Secrets, I think this is overlooked. Although Saucerful of Secrets, I may be in the works to try to actually revisit and appreciate more than I do. I do like some of it, but this album, I came to kind of feel like this. If people that like In the Court of the Crimson King so much, why don't they appreciate this album as much? Because I think this record is really excellent as well. And I'm trying to read it. I mean, I can read the first note. People think that like how Syd Barrett left Pink Floyd, he played on one or two songs on Saucerful. Greg Lake did not leave King Crimson after In the Court of the Crimson King and form ELP. ELP formed, I think it was in 70, but this came out before. I mean, it may have come out after he had left, but he recorded a decent amount of music on this, because he's on this. Peter Giles is the bass player. So, okay, he's on it, and then they had another bass player. Michael Giles, the drummer. Robert Fripp, of course. Keith Tippett plays piano. Mel Collins, saxes and flute. Gordon Haskell and Pete Sinfield wrote the lyrics again. Cat Food, I think, is the song that I think of most for this album. Let me see if I can, pull it up here. Okay, there it is. Cat Food, yeah, which is only less than a 5-minute track, but Cadence and Cascades, another one. Very mellow, but the acoustic guitar work in that is great. It's dreamy. Let's see here. Some of these are like the second track, Pictures of a City, including 42nd at Treadmill, an epic of 8 minutes, and then the second side, besides Cat Food, features The Devil's Triangle. So that's an 11-minute piece. It's been a long time since I've listened to this, but I just remember when I did check out this album, I was really appreciating it. I should revisit it more. I mean, it's got similar elements in the court, but I think some of it's more refined. And obviously Greg Lake's involvement was in and out, or at least in for a while and then not in. So that was in 70. Okay, so their next record was, I believe, The Lizard. And then at that point, obviously, Greg Lake had left. And it was really more of like a Robert Fripp band, in effect. He wasn't releasing it under his own name. It came out in December of 70, and I remember when I was doing those write-ups for the years, I remember reading a little bit about this album, but like Steven Wilson's album, the second album that he released as a solo record, was very influenced by both this and the one after it that I'm about to talk about, Lizard. But you know what? I can't really elaborate that much. It's very avant-garde, very jazzy. I think there's a number of songs that don't even have vocals on this. I'm just looking at this. In fact, there might not. Gordon Haskell does do some vocals, but their drummer, so Mike Giles had left. Andy McCullough was the drummer. Mel Collins still played flute, and so Ian McDonald wasn't with him either at that point. I don't think he was on the last record. So it really was basically Fripp, and that came out at the end of 70. So then 71, I think it was 71, they released Islands, and the Lizard and Islands are two records that, I always say I love the 70s Crimson, but they're two records that I've never been attached to, and a lot of people don't talk about. Maybe they should more, but they were really more experimental. Grace for Drowning is the Steven Wilson album I'm thinking of. If you liked Grace for Drowning, these are the two albums that probably were two of the biggest influences on that album, Islands and Lizard. But again, a lot of instrumental stuff, and again, I don't know, they have a guy named Boz who was the lead vocalist on this record. Mel Collins, Ian Wallace was the drummer, so basically it was the Robert Fripp show, and then sort of a rotating cast, or not rotating, but just a different cast of musicians every time around. Steven Wilson's career is kind of similar because he hasn't had the same lineup on a lot of his records, but I found this for relatively cheap, $9, and I think it's partly because it was a promo copy, so I thought, well, why not? It's not a fortune. If I ever start to appreciate the sort of post Poseidon, pre sort of red lineup Crimson, or not red lineup, but Wetton Bruford lineup Crimson, I would probably want to just go back to this when I get the chance to. But like I said, the Crimson heads, or I didn't say, but Crimson heads that probably worship that record and Lizard to a point. And I do see Lizard. I haven't bought it, but it's usually pretty spendy. I see it often. But anyway, so this was in February. I hope this is right. Again, so that was in 71, December of 71. So they were prolific. He was releasing almost 2 albums a year, which was prolific, but at the same time wasn't that unusual for the 70s or in the 60s. Fripp, basically. So then they released Larkstein and Aspic in 73. And this record was one of the first records I ever heard about. I think this might have been the first one I heard, because when I was into Rush, on the Rush mailing list, and they mentioned King Crimson, this is one of the ones they mentioned. It's like the record you should check out. And this has, of course, the epic Larkstein and Aspic. It's got multiple parts, part 1 and part 2. And I really enjoy a lot of that. It's very instrumental and bass, but at least there are some vocals. I'm not giving misinformation on that. It has Book of Saturday, though, and Easy Money was kind of I think that was on that Person's Guide compilation. That was one of their more accessible tracks. Just getting Talking Drum, another track on this record that I've always enjoyed. But as far as, so John Wetton, Bill Bruford, Jamie Muir was the percussionist. Bruford played the drums. David Cross, they've had a bunch of different violinists. He played violin on this record. The violin parts are really good on this record, and and I think from a prog rock standpoint, like you look at sort of epic works from different bands like Yes and Genesis to a point, Rush even, this is probably the album I would go to in terms of their proggiest at their most epic that's still accessible, if that makes sense. And again, as I mentioned, I think I could probably go for revisiting this record a lot more, and even though I probably rate it as high as any of the other records, in the chord, of course, I just know better just because those songs are more memorable, but, the title track is a epic suite. Also kind of reminds me a little bit of ELP in their sort of brain salad surgery suite with, Carnival 9. Because I was checking out ELP around the same time I was checking out Crimson. Of course, they had the shared member, but Greg Lake wasn't on Lark's Tongue because he had already left and working with Keith Emerson and Carl Palmer. But yeah, this is one of the better records. The Talking Drum's another one. It's just, you know, Crimson, unlike Yes or Genesis or Rush or, you know, even Queen, their music isn't like go-to everyday music for me. I gotta kind of be in the mood to listen to them, but I really do enjoy it when I hear it. So, let's see here. That was in 73. The end of 73 maybe. They waited 2 years. They were probably doing a lot of live stuff, like touring, and Robert was just, you know, trying to find the right musicians. Bill Bruford had left, Yes, of course, and then he joined them, which is kind of weird because he was going to go back to his roots. He's supposed to be playing jazz, but yet, no, Robert Fripp called me. I'll go join them and not play with Yes, which is just weird. It's ironic. Of course, he did his jazz stuff later because Bill Bruford, as a drummer, really, his origins were as a, you know, as a jazz drummer. He should have tried to join Miles Davis or one of the fusion bands, but he did later and formed his own band, the Earthwork stuff. So, all right, then 74. This is the second album with this lineup, I believe. They put out Starless and Bible Black, and this has a number of tracks I enjoy as well. Between The Great Deceiver, The Night Watch Trio, the title track. But the weird thing about it is, you know, I haven't spent worlds of time listening to this album. The song Starless isn't on this. I, for a long time, always thought it was, because of course the title. But yeah, I mean, this album took me a long time to find. The 70s Crimson, generally a lot of Crimson is just, for vinyl, is very elusive. It's just people don't want to give up their stuff. Fracture's another one. Of course, they spell it Fracture, 11-minute piece. John Wetton's presence, I think, does really make give their kind of a signature sound in this period, in like the early to mid 70s. I don't know who he had been with before. He was a solo artist. He probably had played with someone, but I'm not enough of a, you know, I don't have knowledge enough to. Of course, this not exactly the most stable case, but again, I paid $10 for this at Half Price Books, and it just was one that, you know, definitely I don't see very often. Let me just see the lineup. Is there anything different? Am I on the right record here? Yeah. And it was March of 74, so it was less than 6 months after Lark's Tongue. So they put those two out, you know, the same lineup, of course. So, alright, my collection then starts to become thin. Of course, they put out the album after that, it was later in 74, yeah, it was, Red. That was, I'm just pulling it up. Of course, features, I think, almost consider their most known or signature song, other than maybe In the Court of the Crimson King or 21st Century Schizo Band. The title track to Red, that that I always think of that riff, and of course I just saw Robert Fripp a couple months ago with his guitar orchestra thing, and they did cover Red. It's a very memorable piece. But Starless, though, on the Red album is, to me, the peak of their powers, at least of this period, probably in the history of their band. Actually, it's just phenomenal. And the saxophone part on 21st Century Schizoid Band was great. It was awesome, let's be honest. They trumped it by a lot on this one. This, I think, is maybe might be the greatest saxophone part in rock music history to me, in progressive rock. Perhaps. I may be kind of shortchanging Jethro Tull on it. I didn't really mention that much in the Jethro Tull video, how the use of on both Passion Play and I think in Thick as a Brick, but definitely a Passion Play. But and the saxophonist on Red wasn't Ian McDonald, I guess. I'm just looking at the lineup here. Am I missing something? Because it just lists Robert Fripp playing mellotron and guitar, of course, the writer. John Wetton, of course, was the vocalist and bass player. They put William Bruford, it's Bill Bruford, as the drummer, but something is missing on that information. But I am going to try to find this as quickly as I can. If Wikipedia doesn't, make me feel like I'm in a traffic jam. Where's their discography would be? There it is. Let's see here. Who plays that famous? Why don't I know who plays? October 5th, 74 was when this album was released. Who plays the saxophone? Mel Collins. Yep, it was Mel Collins. And One More Red Nightmare, which is a great track as well. The sax part was played by McDonald. So, if Rate Your Music and on Starless, so maybe they did like a duet. If Rate Your Music isn't totally screwed up, which it might be, I can understand, because the main personnel on this record are just the three. They were basically a trio. They had guest musicians. They had David Cross show up on Providence. But I haven't found a copy of it on vinyl. I've seen it for pretty pricey amounts, 40, 50 bucks. I will eventually pick up a copy of Red. That's one of like the 10 70s albums from the 70s, 60s, 70s that I'm just trying to find an affordable copy that I haven't yet. But Red is a famous record. That's sort of, some people consider the peak of Crimson. That even though it was only a trio technically on their lineup, that was, and then they stopped. So I mean, they went out on top, or they stopped at a peak point, at a plateau, maybe to a point with that lineup, that sound. So I mean, would have it been great for that lineup to write more music? Perhaps, but they might have felt sort of like what some people felt Genesis did after The Lamb. They weren't really coming up with as many innovative, sort of pioneering ideas. So they did, 74, and then Robert Fripp ended up playing with Peter Gabriel and Bowie, David Bowie, of course. He was on Heroes, and Bill Bruford did jazz, and he played with Genesis, and then eventually him and John Wetton end up in UK, I believe, on the first UK album, which I eventually might talk about UK, because UK to me sounds a lot like King Crimson, and some people might consider that. But they did, of course, reform, and Robert Fripp under the name, and they did stuff in the 80s, which this is going to be, hopefully, not too detailed, because, let's see here, they put out Discipline in 1981, and I remember checking that out a couple of years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago. A lot of people love this album, or think it's just very highly sort of progressive and innovative, and frame by frame and Elephant Talk I don't mind, but I struggled with some of it. It definitely sounds like it's influenced by new wave music, a lot of samples, almost the stuff that, not samples, but textures, like different synth textures and stuff. And of course it does include, this is the first appearance of Adrian Belew and Tony Levin, but Bruford did come back, so I mean he didn't really, he left Crimson, I guess he was still loyal to Robert Fripp, which he really wasn't incredibly loyal to Yes until he rejoined them with ABWH, but that's a whole different issue. So that was in 81. I mean, I guess if I ever look for a vinyl copy, if I ever find it cheap, I'd pick it up, but in 82 they put out Beat, which, that album I think I maybe didn't even listen to half of when I was checking out Crimson. That was the same lineup, but again, let's do a bunch of experimental stuff and a lot of, kind of 80s new wave stuff. Adrian Belew had been in the Talking Heads. He'd been in Frank Zappa, but also in Talking Heads. So Talking Heads, while they were rock, they were also kind of new wavy. And I mean, the actic music showed up, but I mean, from a songwriting melodic standpoint, you didn't find a ton of it on there. So then they put out in 84, Three of a Perfect Pair. I'm just going to kind of go through this relatively quick. And I do have this. I can't believe I paid $5. I do really like the title track, and that's the main reason why I bought this. I would say this album, they do a Lark, Stone, and Aspic Part 3, but this album, well, it features that same lineup of Adrian Belew, Robert Fripp, Tony Levin, and Bill Bruford. Other than the title track, maybe even less replayable than even Discipline. So that's not good for the weather. Get some lightning. I have to pick up my fiance in a couple hours. It's going to be a fun little trek down there. But anyway, you can see here's my little sleeve and with some of the lyrics. They were doing a lot of, experimental sort of electronic, new wavy kind of stuff. I mean, I don't know if they were listening to like the Police and some of those type of bands, and like Anders Voldenweier and like new age music, stuff like that. I don't know, but that's kind of the way they were going in the 80s. It definitely, even though they have like a rock instrumentation lineup, that's always kind of the way it's reminded me of. So, I mean, among all the records, I probably would lean toward Islands and Lizard over the 80s stuff. I love the title track, which the title track, Three of a Perfect Pair, that both Between the Buried and Me and Burst, both had songs that basically had that same interval pattern. But it's a great interval pattern, and it was been metallized or whatever you want to say, metallicized up. It sounds great. So then at that point in that was 84, Fripp did some other stuff. Bruford was doing his Earthwork stuff. I mean, they just kind of took a break. It was the Robert Fripp show whenever it's available. They reformed in the 90s, and 95 they put out Thrak, and I remember liking it. It had that song Dinosaur, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I even bought the CD. This was the new, yes, it's a 6-minute song. Had Vroom. it's more metal, I guess, or it's heavier, but it didn't, you know, it was so dissonant. I mean, a lot of Crimson's dissonant. That album, you know, I guess I probably should revisit. When it came out, I liked it, but never fell in love with it. I just was more attached to stuff like In the Court and Starless the song, Starless the Bible Black, and In the Wake of Poseidon when I was checking out Crimson 15, 20 years ago. So then they put out the DVD, of course, a couple years later when I was checking them out with that cool 21st Century Schizoid Man. 2000, they put out the Construction of Light, and, you know, how that differs vastly from Thrak. I listened to parts of it. It has a fractured with a K, not a C, because of course the K. And they put it includes a couple more more parts of Lark's Tongue and Aspic, but I just remember this being influenced by a lot of metal. I think Tool was probably influenced Robert Fripp as much as Tool was being influenced by Robert Fripp. But I don't have a lot of commentary. That among the albums from the 90s on is the lowest rated, the Construction of Light, which came out in 2000. In 2003, their last studio album was The Power to Believe, and in terms of ratings on Rate Your Music, it's the highest among those. It's really high actually. I mean, among their catalog, it's probably in the top 5 at 3.59 stars out of 5. But as an average, of course. The Power to Believe, again, I just, you know, and it has Trey Gunn, of course, and Pat Mastelotto, who were on that DVD. Trey Gunn plays war guitar, which is kind of and a fretless guitar. Kind of like a Chapman stick, but people, you know, I think 2011 also, at points when they had the double trio, played Chapman stick, so. But yeah, I mean, the post discipline, or even post, you know, Red Crimson has always been very hit and miss for me. But I think part of my taste could be different if I really invest the time, and I might regret it because, you know, I saw them on the one tour. They toured a couple of years ago. I would love to all these years appreciate more of the Crimson stuff, even the recent stuff. But the more recent stuff, the last 3 albums, the last, 20 years, are more like down-tuned, and they're heavier. They're just frankly more emphasized on heaviness. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad. I guess I might lean more toward them than the stuff from the 80s, because the 80s stuff with the electronics lost me maybe even more. So King Crimson are a band that, like I said, their best stuff is really good, but their stuff that isn't so good is kind of a challenge at best. But I do like challenges in music, and they've influenced a ton of bands I love. So I totally credit them for that and respect them, and I would put them among the progressive rock bands right up there. So, but anyway, what's your take on King Crimson? What are your top 3 or 5 albums? What's your take on like Islands and Lizard and the 80s stuff and the stuff that's come the last 20 years? I'd be curious to hear. Please comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.